So good evening, everybody. Welcome to our seminar this evening, one of our virtual seminars. My name is David Shankland. I'm the chair of the Society, and it's a great pleasure to welcome our speaker this evening. Now, the broad topic that we're looking at, the development of British relations during the time of the late Ottoman Empire, is one that really has a never-ending fascination. And we're going to hear tonight an aspect of it, which I don't think we've touched upon before. Of course, the absolutely crucial question is how these warm and complex ties of mutual support eventually gave way to becoming mutual belligerents in the Great War, which is, of course, one of the great tragedies of our times. But, the more we understand the development of the late 19th century Ottoman Empire, the better we'll realize why everything went so badly wrong only one generation. Our speaker this evening, Dr. Sena Dinçyürek, is going to be talking about her research specifically on the British relief efforts for the Ottoman refugees in the 1877-78 Russo-Turkish War. So there we are. The floor is yours, and we look forward to your talk. And I shall mute myself and go blank during your talk, and so that you've completely got the stage to yourself. But we shall nevertheless all be here listening to you. So thank you very much, and look forward to your talk.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great honor to be here tonight. Let me start by sharing my screen. Oh, is it working? All right. I believe it's working now. Well, this is my topic, obviously. I will try to be least boring as possible. In fact, this is the research topic for my master thesis, which I have completed 13 years ago. So it was sort of my first baby in the field. Then I finished my master thesis. I published it into a book, worked on it a little further, but not much. Then I have given a couple of talks regarding it, but then I switched my topic almost entirely for my PhD studies. So this is sort of a bit historical, with personally historical for my personal history as well. So I will try to do my best tonight. And I was sort of happy that I had the opportunity. Well, at the beginning of last summer, I have given a talk on a related subject, but not concentrated on the relief efforts of the British. However, it was a nice turn back as well, but this time exactly on my master thesis altogether. All right, so what am I going to talk about? Introduction to my topic. So basically, I will try to give you a general picture regarding the Russo-Turkish War of 1877-78, which is also known as the 93 Harbi, 93 War in the Turkish literature. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the concept of different calendars in the Ottoman use. And in one of the calendars, this is the Rumi calendar, the war took place in the year 1293. This is where the name comes from. But according to the normal calendar, let's say, it started on April 24th with the crossing of the Russian armies of the Prut River. And it was complete by the March the 3rd, 1878, as the Treaty of San Stefano was signed between the two belligerent parties. So, I mean, I don't want to go over the details of the war, but basically the Russian army started to march towards towards the Ottoman lands. I don't have a map, but think about it. Just like today's Turkey, we have the Black Sea in the north, and the Russian armies are approaching from both sides of the Black Sea, from east and west. From west, they were marching over the Balkans. Their aim was the Ottoman capital Istanbul, and in the east they were marching over the Caucasus. They reached up to Kars, Erzurum, comparatively inner cities of the Eastern Anatolia. Well, the war had political, territorial, and immediate humanitarian consequences. The one I'm going to concentrate on tonight is the exodus, the mass migration, mass flight of the Muslim refugees. After the war, the remainder of the Ottoman Empire got a more Asiatic outlook. I'm talking about the geography, and demographically, it had a greater Muslim density. So, I mean, this is pure mathematics, basically. Ottomans lost a great portion of their land in Europe, especially in Europe, today's Bulgaria, most of today's Bulgaria. So basically, the Christian population of the empire was lost as well, and the remaining Muslim population had fled towards the inner parts of the empire. So it changed the demographic realities of the empire immediately. And also, since they lost their territories in Europe, the geographical outlook of the empire also became more Asiatic. Well, when we talk about the Russian war, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the concept. I don't want to bore you with the details. However, we have to, in order to understand my topic, we have to take into consideration of the developments of the previous couple of years, especially in the Balkan crisis that seriously affected the relation between the British and the Ottoman Empire. And so there was a diplomatic tension between the port, the Sublime Porte, the Ottoman government, and London at the very beginning of the Russo-Turkish War. And in the end, with this war, we will see an episode of humanitarian diplomacy. And this is where the relief for the refugees comes into picture. Basically, okay, before I go into the details, when I talk about the relations between the British and the Ottoman governments, I have to underline the fact that they had been allies only about 25 years, not only 20 years ago, right, 23 years ago, between 1853 to 1856 Crimean War. The British, the French and the Italian fought alongside with the Ottomans against the Russians. So during the Crimean War, they were allies. Actually, British army was, and as well as Navy, was housed in the Ottoman capital. It was the military base. The secretary part of Istanbul was the military base for the British army. And they were embarking their operations from that. So basically, and after the war, we know with the Paris Peace Treaty, we know that the Ottoman Empire was officially recognized as a part of the European state system. So when the war broke out in 1877, when Russia attacked Ottoman territories, it was the expectation of the Hamidian, this young Hamidian governments, that their allies are going to come for their help, especially the British. So we know that Abdülhamid II just came to throne in 1876. So he has been on the throne only for, let's say, let me check the dates, only for 8 months. Then the war broke out. So he was very, as I told you, the government was quite young, and it was the period of the first constitutional period in the Ottoman Empire. So they were optimistic, they were expecting aid, but the military help, in the form of alliance, it did not come. So this is where the humanitarian diplomacy side of the story came into being. So, well, this is the general. With the war, I will talk about numbers a little bit. I won't go into the details. but huge numbers of refugees poured into the heartlands of the empire. This is a problematic matter. I mean, not when we say heartlands of the empire, I think, I mean, how do we define the heartlands of the empire? I mean, we looking from the classical perspective, we regard the Ottoman Empire being a Balkan empire. However, they were the Muslim refugees were trying to flee towards the inner parts of the empire, trying to come closer to Istanbul. Basically, they were running away from the marching Russian armies. This was the immediate humanitarian crisis. They needed help. They needed help in any form, and the help came from the British. So this is going to be the general. I will try to detail this part of the Anglo-Ottoman relations. But before I do that, I would like to introduce you with my sources. How did I come across with this topic? Basically, this was an outcome of old school archival research in the Ottoman archives. I told you it was about 13 years ago. I don't know, perhaps even more than that. And I was working in Istanbul in the Ottoman archives because this is what my advisor at the time told me to do. He said that by the way, Oktay Özel, and he was very determined on the fact that I have to spend time in the archives in order to understand, in order to get to know the material. And I knew that I was trying to find my way around the archives. And I knew that I was interested in diplomatic history. And it's always a good idea to start with something that you are familiar with. And I was familiar with the British ambassador to the port during the Hamidian period, Henry Layard. So I started researching I was going through the catalogs, like hard copy catalogs, and I came across with an interesting document, which was about this imperial order and Nishan, okay, that was going to be given to the wife of Henry Layard, Lady Layard, by Abdülhamid II, the Sultan at the time, as a thank her. It's like to recognize her services for the well-being of the Ottoman refugees. And this was the first time I came across with such a topic. I had no idea there was such a relief effort by the British. So I got curious and I started digging up it. And it turns out that this matter was briefly mentioned in a number of studies that focused on immigration and 93 refugees. However, there were no monographic work on it. So basically, I decided to work on it, come up with come up with a general picture of this story. So I started to work. I mean, basically, the story is generally told by the British sources, okay? So the core of the story was told by the British archives. When I say British archives, of course, I'm talking about the Foreign Office documents from the National Archives in the Kew Gardens, because we know that there is a very extended consular network in Ottoman Empire, British consular network, and their reports are so valuable when we compare the sources with the Ottoman sources. We know that the story is generally told by the British sources, but we compare and contrast, we sort of do the math with the Ottoman sources. I had the opportunity to use the Red Cross archives in London as well. Reports of the relief committees, which were actually published in the 19th century, they were published. And because these committees, these relief committees, they wanted to explain themselves. They wanted to share the records of their spendings with their donators. So this was one of their responsibilities, to publish their reports. So basically, these published reports helped me a lot. The published records of the Turkish Compassionate Fund, which turns out to be the main institution of the relief work, the reports and records of the Stafford House Committee, which is also one of the committees that worked for the Ottoman refugees, one of the British committees that worked for the Ottoman refugees. And also the British Red Cross records were published into books, but they were not available elsewhere. This is why I had to visit the Red Cross archives in London. Also, this period is, I mean, I was very lucky to have the memoirs of Henry Layard and Lady Layard, and I was lucky at the time they were being published by the ISIS Press in Istanbul, and the editors were very generous to share the details with me at the time, so they were a huge help. Of course, the contemporary newspapers, especially the Times, the Daily Telegraph, they were quite of help. And these are all the English sources, all the British sources that I've used. I mean, when we look at the Ottoman side of it, of course, the Ottoman archives, especially the Yıldız Palace records, Yıldız Palace, the palace of Abdülhamit II, these records helped me a lot. But as I told you at the beginning, the main source of information were the British sources. But I could only compare and do the math with the Ottoman sources because the British sources were all, of course, more detailed. They were reporting the capital regarding every detail, all the movements, all the refugee influx and all that. So it helped me a lot. Okay. So when I say refugees, I'm talking about the immigrants. I mean, they are not really immigrants. I mean, not immigrants, but refugees. This is the term I'm using. There are a number of terms that can be used, like fugitives, refugees, immigrants, or victims of war. In Turkish literature, they are generally referred as muhacir. Muhacir is the Arabic word for immigrant. This has like this Islamic connections as well. But basically, in this case, the group of people that I was dealing with were refugees. They had to flee the war. They had to save themselves. They had to save their families. This flight was not a planned immigration, but it was only an escape. They did not intend to stay in their new destiny for a long time. They wanted to go back to their homes as soon as possible, if possible. So this was the general outlook. So they had no time for preparation. They had no plans. They don't really know where to go. They're just trying to find a safer place. In most of the cases, they just take refuge in the closest safe nearby center. Okay, in some cases these can be cities with strong military connections. In some cases it doesn't have to be any closer to Istanbul than where they were already. So we see like they go from one place to another on the map. We can follow their, so let's say they start from the north, they go down, if I'm talking about the Balkans, they go closer to Edirne first, like they go to Shumen, and then when Shumen falls, they have to flee Shumen and come to Edirne, and when Edirne falls, they have to flee Edirne and come to Istanbul. So this is like they are trying to save their lives and families. And we do not talk about intact families. We don't talk about I mean, they are not like men, young men, women, children, elderly all together. Most of the time they were like women and children and only elderly men or very young boys, because most of the men were already enlisted or they were dead. So the general conditions of the refugees were worse than they could ever be, because in their arrival place, I mean, they were not safe throughout the route. And once they arrived in a new place, they did not have the means, they did not have the man of the family to work for bread in the arrival place. So it was all problematic. How did they? I mean, they sort of followed. I mean, they couldn't help, of course, but the waves of migration followed the routes of the Russian armies through the Caucasus and through the Balkans. So they used land routes, of course, railways if possible. This is why they tried to get to city centers. This is where they could get on trains. And if possible, they try to reach port cities to get on a ship for a safer port city. In most of the cases, that would be Istanbul. So basically, we see very crowded railways. The stations are crowded. They overload the trains. There are recorded accidents because of the overloading of the trains. They have to spend days waiting for a ship to come, and it's never safe, never healthy. And there turns out to be some accumulation centers, not only in the Balkans, but especially in Istanbul, for example. Dar Saadet, that's the Arabic word for the Gate of Felicity. This is how Istanbul was referred at the time by the Ottomans. So Dar Saadet, the Gate of Felicity, became a city of refugees. And I mean, at the peak of the crisis, they talk about daily arrival of 20,000 refugees into Istanbul. So all of the public spaces, all of the public buildings, all of the mosques, masjids, parts of palaces, they were all filled by the refugees. According to records, only in St. Sophia and the Blue Mosque, they had to house 5,000 refugees in each of them. Okay, so 5,000 refugees in Hagia Sophia, St. Sophia, and 5,000 refugees in the Blue Mosque, and all of the other public buildings, schools, and all that, they were all filled with destitute refugees. And I mean, once they were in Istanbul, they were generally arriving in Sirkeci region, Eminönü region, and there were some stops in Ribar area. They were getting checked. They were and also the Yeni Cami in Eminönü. It was also one of the accumulation spots for the arriving refugees in Istanbul. So Istanbul was one of the accumulation centers, most important accumulation center, but also Edirne, Varna, Şumlu, they were all centers of refugee accumulation. So they were suffering. So what happened then? Of course, I mean, from the very beginning, there was the Ottoman authorities were trying to deal with the humanitarian crisis. There is the Immigrant Commission, Muhacirin Komisyonu, that has been working since the 1860s. However, nothing was enough at the time. And we understand there was the British involvement in the air. If we look at the reasons for this British involvement, I divide that into two parts. First of all, the socio-cultural reasons, and then the political reasons. Well, this is the, I mean, we are talking about 1870s, so late 1870s. So this is the age of Victorian philanthropy, age of philanthropists. This was a very important aspect in the British culture at the time. London charities played a prominent role. The budgets of these charities even exceeded some of the colonies and small countries in Europe. Publication of charitable institutions, charitable work was very important. It was a source of imperial and national pride. I sort of make this resemblance between the philanthropic work of Victorian England with the patronage of the Renaissance period, perhaps. So this was a way of showing social distinction. When we look at the charitable organization, we see the women dominance. They were generally from high classes, and because this was a sign of high social standing, either like members of the royal family or members of the aristocracy as well. There was a very strong religious connection with the charitable work, with the philanthropic work, but it was not exclusive, as it was the case with the help to the Ottoman refugees. The second reason is the political reason. Well, in the case of the 1877-78 Russo-Turkish War, the Ottoman refugees, this relief work was used as a tool of diplomacy. I have the tendency to stick with the concept of humanitarian diplomacy because they had their concerns. The British, especially the British ambassador at the time, Henry Layard, who was serving in Istanbul since 1877, he was rather concerned regarding the public opinion and the general understanding of the government at the time, because they were, as I told you, expecting some kind of a British assistance to help them out with the Russians, and it didn't come. And there are a number of reasons for that. I won't go into the details, but as I told you, the developments of the previous 2 years in the Balkans, the Balkan upheavals, and the reaction of the Ottoman authorities had a very negative impact on the British public opinion at the time. Bulgarian Harriers campaign took place in 1876. It was initiated by the opposition leader at the time, Gladstone. He was actually using this foreign policy incident as a tool to corner the Disraeli government at the time, because he was accusing the Disraeli government for being pro-Ottoman, because they were the Ottoman reaction to the upheavals in the in the Balkan territories by the Christian subjects. They were highly criticized by the English public opinion at the time. So basically, at the beginning of the war, the British had no opportunity. The British government had no chance to support the Ottoman government militarily, politically, because basically they did not have the public support behind them. So even though they remained neutral, there was a very close monitoring of the developments in the East, despite the British neutrality. How did they do that? The public closely followed what was going on in the East between the Russians and the Turks. At the beginning of the war, the anti-Turkish sentiments were very high. But as at the first phases of the war, the Turkish resistance, the heroic Turkish resistance in Pleven and Kars, had some reaction, positive reaction, received some positive reaction from the British public. So this is how there were anti-Ottoman sentiments at the beginning, but they did not want the Russians to become too powerful, replace the Ottomans in the region, and upset the balance of power in the region, obviously. So generally the public opinion cannot be generally regarded as pro-Russian either. So they were following closely what was going on via newspaper agents, war correspondents, and large consular networks in the Ottoman Empire. The committees could not legally aid the armies for arms, since England was a neutral country, but relieving wounded and sick soldiers was considered as humanitarian work. But it's not, at the beginning, the understanding of relief was limited to soldiers, but eventually it became, of course, with the refugee influx, they had no other chance but help out with the refugees as well. There is a nice quotation from the Times of September 12, 1877. Never probably have so many imperative demands made upon the generosity of the British nation, and never has the cry for help met with a response so prompt and liberal. So this is making a reference to the coming help from the British to the Ottoman refugees. I have already talked about it, I'm sorry. As the war proceeded, the news of the heroic Turkish resistance in the Pleven and Kars were received in London, and pro-Turkish sentiments started to prevail among the British public. And here we come across with Henry Layard once again, because he was one of the prominent figures. He was in fact the architect of the relief campaign. Well, Layard has a long history with Turkey, with Ottoman Empire. He came to Ottoman lands as a young man in 1840s for the first time, and he is known as an archaeologist. He did these great excavations in Mesopotamia, so he is very well known in the field of archaeology. In the field of diplomacy, of course, he is a prominent figure too. So he was the one to, let's say, initiate this whole relief campaign for the Ottomans. Let me start with this quotation. The administration and distribution of the Turkish Compassionate Fund. So the Turkish Compassionate Fund becomes the main institution, main establishment, the funding for the British relief towards the 93 refugees. So the administration and distribution of the Turkish Compassionate Fund added not a little, as it may be imagined, to my already heavy official duties. But I undertook this work cheerfully, for it was one of humanity, and moreover, I was anxious to give as a public a proof as possible that in England there was as much compassion for the misfortunes and sufferings of the Muslims as for those of the upon the Mohammedans would at the same time be of no little advantage to our interests and influence, especially amongst the Muslim population of our Indian Empire, who were known to have deep sympathy for their co-religionists in Turkey and to be greatly concerned in the issue of war. So he is saying that that was a huge burden, but I'm cheerfully undertaking this burden as the ambassador, as the British ambassador to the port, because I think that is this is, of course, humanitarian work. This is the necessity because there are the crises. He sees that, okay, this is a part, he lives in Istanbul, so this is the reality in Istanbul at the time. And also he considers that as an opportunity to sort of amend the relations between the Muslim public and the British Empire. He is not only concerned about the public opinion of the Ottomans, but he is also concerned about the Muslims of India, which is a part of the British Empire at the time. So they, and we know that there are a lot of records in the Ottoman archives regarding the relief, regarding the financial aid received from Indian Muslims during this time as well. So they were deeply concerned with the Russian attack, deeply concerned with the Ottoman difficulties, and they were trying to help. So, you know, while helping, so the British government should undertake this opportunity. So this is not an official endeavor, by the way, this is civilian, but as the ambassador, he is supporting it because he believes that it has all these political benefits. So I refer to this part as the Layard factor because his personality played an important role. He put a great amount of energy into organizing the relief of the 1993 refugees. Layard's old friendship with Baroness Burdett Coutts, the greatest philanthropist of the Victorian England, was perhaps the only piece of good fortune to be had by these destitute victims of war. His words were influential with the Baroness, who would establish the Turkish Compassionate Fund through a major donation. So when we look at, let's say, individual level of this story, this is the, after Layard, of course, Baroness Burdett Coutts turns out to be a very significant name for our topic, because she in fact was the greatest philanthropist of the time of the Victorian England, and she was the one who established the Turkish Compassionate Fund in London, and she had good relations with Layard, and she trusted his word. This is how she initiated this campaign. Sincere belief in the benefit of such actions must have been one of the reasons for the Layard's commitments. He was the director and treasurer of the Compassionate Fund and distributed the money and organized relief through consular agents serving in different parts of the empire under his command. He mobilized every means he had and cooperated with his wife, Lady Annette Layard. The embassy in Tarabya became a workshop of preparing relief materials. The first institution I'm going to cover is the Turkish Compassionate Fund. This is Baroness Angela Burdett-Coutts, and I'm going to talk about the foundation of the Turkish Compassionate Fund. As I told you, she was one of the best known women of the Victorian England. She has a very interesting personal story. I am sure some of you are familiar with her. She inherited a great fortune at a very young age. And she was friends with Charles Dickens. And Charles Dickens sort of directed her to use her money for good. And this is how she got involved in the philanthropic work, especially in East London. This is like she started domestically. She donated a lot for the English church. And then she started to make donations abroad as well. So after in 1862, for example, she initiated a relief campaign for Ireland after the Great Famine. Also, interestingly, she came. Let's say we come across with her for the Turkish history beforehand as well, because she was friends with Florence Nightingale, the famous nurse, and Florence Nightingale was serving in Istanbul during the Crimean War, and she was corresponding with Burdett-Coutts. And at the time, she was complaining about the difficulty of drying the clothes in the hospital in Scutari. And in fact, Baroness Burdett-Coutts made a special drying closet for her, make it built, and send it composed to Istanbul by ship. And this is how they could get, this is a like huge drying machine, a primitive one. There are pictures, drawings. And this is how Florence Nightingale was very thankful, because they could then dry for 250 pieces of linen in less than 20 minutes. So this was a great service of Burdett-Coutts for the soldiers that were fighting in the Crimean War, and the 106 soldiers that were actually get treatment in Istanbul back at the time. And she also sent support money for their families too. And when we come to 1870s, why did she initiate a relief campaign for Turkey? Well, in one of her biographies, there is a multifaceted, let's say, explanation for that. Well, it's said that she was an admirer of the Orient. She had strong connections with Turkey at the time, because she had friends living there, and she had personal connections with Layard, and she trusted his word. And also she was extremely uncomfortable with the fact that the refugees were suffering because of the Christians, and so she wanted to sort of try to make up for it. So we understand that she came to realize the urgency of the situation, because, as I told you, thousands of refugees were pouring towards the inner parts of the empire, and they were in destitute conditions. The epidemics were prevailing. They had the hunger, of course. They had no clothes to wear. They had no shelter. They were in need of any kind of aid. So she made an appeal to the public for the non-combatants with a strong religious tone, targeting the upper levels of the society. And her letter, her appeal, appeared in the Daily Telegraph. And she even made that interesting, let's say, she even said that, well, those who are enjoying your vacations as well, think about the refugees, okay? She even played this card as well. And she received a very strong response from the British public. And 2 days later, on the newspaper, we came across with this, the announcement of the establishment of the Turkish Compassionate Fund. So basically, it was under the administration of His Excellency, the British Ambassador, to whom a donation of £100 has been transmitted by Her Majesty the Queen, and the fund was instituted under the auspices of the Baroness Burdett Coutts. So if you look at the names, you will see Mrs. Layard as well over here, Lady Layard, some of the high-class members of the society, especially female members, and also some men were among the first members of the society. And it's underlining the fact that for the purpose of affording assistance for the fugitive men, women, and children, non-combatants, Jews, Christians, Muslims in Constantinople, Adrianople, Philippopolis, and the surrounding districts. So mainly the fund is aiming the Balkans. We know that refugees are pouring from Caucasus as well, but the influx in the Balkans is much more, it's huge compared to the Eastern developments. So the Turkish Compassionate Fund was established on August 14, 1878. Kostakimi Musurus Pasha, the Ottoman ambassador to London between 1850 to 1885, informed the Porte regarding the establishment of the fund, and 2 days later, an imperial decree was issued. Imperial decree, it's an irade in Ottoman. Imperial decree was issued to express the Sultan's gratitude for such an effort. Musurus Pasha will continue to report to Ottoman Foreign Ministry regarding the activities of the fund along with the list of the contributors. So he is going to be the main connection in London, of course, as the Ottoman ambassador in London. He is going to inform Istanbul about what's going on, how they are raising the funds. When we look at the contributions, the Turkish Compassion Fund became the main intermediary between the British public and the refugees. Baroness was in charge in London, and Layard was administering the fund within the Ottoman Empire. Istanbul was the center. However, Edirne was going to be the headquarters in the Balkans under the British Consul Blunt at the time. We come across this very strong emphasis on helping the non-combatants and the ambassadors, superintendents. Okay, so they keep underlining these two facts because the contributors are very concerned regarding where their funds are going to be spent. They do not want their funds to be spent on the combatants. They don't want to be a part of the war. They want to keep their neutrality. And they want, the Layard superintendents, Layard being at the head of the organization, makes a great difference. At the very beginning, they picked the name the Turkish Compassionate Fund, but even this is debated. Some claim that the picking of the word Turkish is a mistake. They should have taken Eastern instead, but they stick with the Turkish version. And the Turkish translation, which I came across with in the Ottoman documents as well, is Sermaye-i Şefkati Osmaniye. So basically, it is a direct translation, but they picked the word Ottoman instead of Turkish, because back at the time, Turkish did not really refer to Ottoman. Turkish generally meant Muslim subjects. First sum to be received in Istanbul was £4,000. By February, the transferred sum reached around £30,000, but these amounts were huge amounts at the time. For example, they organized a fete in Alexandra Palace, a special organization to benefit the refugees. That was announced by the Times. And they could collect £250 out of this night. Okay, so even this great organization could come up with £250. So if you compare the numbers, that makes more sense. And eventually, not only the members of the high class, but also we come across some letters from the working class British men and women who wanted to contribute to the relief campaigns for the Turkish refugees, because they were, as I told you, there were a lot of correspondence on the newspapers, so they were very closely following the developments in the East. At the end of the operations, £34,000 of the 43, let's say £43,000 total money that Henry Layard received for the fund was directed by the Quds Bank. So this Quds Bank is the bank of Burdett Quds. So this basically shows us the amount that was sent from London to Istanbul directly through the Compassionate Fund. The difference between the two sums represented the amount received from India and other places. However, Henry Layard stated in his memoir the total sum he received amounted to nearly £80,000. And it is, I mean, they did not only send money, but they sent items as well. For example, a ship was sent loaded with cargo for relief of the refugees, was also sent from London. And when we look at the recipients of the relief, we see that the recipients of the relief, as I told you, they are Muslim refugees, but they are not exclusively Muslims, but we see Jews, some Christian subjects as well. So there was no clear-cut division. Of course, we are talking about we are talking about war conditions. It's impossible to separate people from each other, and also the war is affecting everyone, so they were trying to concentrate on the non-combatants only. So this is their distinction. How about the agents of the relief? All of the British diplomatic staff deployed in the region, consuls, vice consuls, attachés, and other consul employees, they were all in charge. They were led by Layard from Istanbul, but they were all a part of the relief work. Lady Layard and the English residents women in Istanbul, they were also a part of the relief effort. We will come to that in a moment. It is a very detailed operation. It's all around the empire, especially in the Balkans. So we see there a lot of correspondence in the British archives, lots of letters, a lot of notes in their personal memoirs as well, and also in the record books of these committees too. We see this was a huge operation, a great network. How did they sort of find their way out? So we see that at the beginning, Layard sent inquiries to British consuls in different centers with these questions. What are the numbers of the Muslim women and children fugitives in your district? What is the present daily expenditure of their relief? What are your available funds in hand? Does any local fund exist which may be relied on during the coming winter? Are there any means of employing these people in local industry which will be partly self-supporting? What is most necessary in the way of food and clothing and other necessaries during the coming winter? So he is sending inquiries first, and he's trying to organize his relief depending on the answers, but the answers can never be so certain. For example, with the numbers, they generally answer, well, the numbers are going up daily. So no, let's say, certain answers. The Turkish Compassion Fund started to establish they started to fund establishments in these relief centers. I won't be able to go into details, but they established soup kitchens, bakeries, they established hospitals, they established asylums. These were shelters for the refugees, and orphanages as well. So with soup kitchens, they were generally very close to railway stations. They were trying to sort of greet the newcomers in the destitute conditions. They are trying to feed them. They had a number of hospitals. Some of these hospitals, especially around Istanbul, some of these hospitals were in fact run by the English residents of Istanbul, the existing residents of English residents of Istanbul, and they were also cooperating with other organizations as well. And with the asylum, they are trying to shelter as many people as possible, especially women and children in this case, and orphanages, because many children lost their families on the way. This is one of the drawings from the time. This is probably from Illustrated London News. This is showing the cloth distribution of the fund. This must be from Shulname, if I'm not mistaken. When we look at the content of the relief, food, medicine, clothing, charcoal, and money directly to refugees or to other organizations for the refugees who are returning their homes, and also for the ladies committee. So these were where the money was sent. So they were purchasing food, they were purchasing medicine and clothing and charcoal, because they had these refugees, if they were lucky enough, they had their charcoal burners. In Turkish, these are small mangals, because we are talking about winter conditions, especially at the beginning of the war. And when necessary, they gave refugees money directly. And for the returners, because in some cases, some refugees actually could go back to their homes. And so in these cases, they were paid as well. So the ship I told you about that was received from London is called the Constance. It was a very famous yacht at the time. She departed Southampton on October 6, 1877, and arrived in Istanbul in mid-November, surviving 2 great storms. So this yacht was loaded with Turkish Compassion Fund's cargo, and William Ashmead Bartlett, a man called William Ashmead Bartlett, was the special commissioner. And he came with the ship, and when he arrived in Istanbul as the special commissioner, he had this inspection tour to the major relief centers. The cargo composed of a wide range of supplies donated by the British benefactors housed in Mehmet Ali Han in Galata in Istanbul. This is an important Han, important commercial district. So we will see in the later parts of the relief effort, they are going to house other items of the fund in this Han as well. This is like a depot, but a depot for the commercial goods. Well, of course, this relief effort, so this is a great network. Basically, Layard is at the top. The sources are coming from London. He is organizing the relief in Ottoman lands using the consular networks. Also, there are some agents of the funds as well, but very, very minor in comparison in numbers. The process seems to be working. However, it was not a smooth process. Participating in the relief work was not that smooth for the volunteers. First of all, we are talking about war conditions, so scarcity of food, prevalence of the epidemics, lack of security, they were all valid for the volunteers who came to help the refugees here in Turkey as well. they were threatened just like the Ottoman subjects, perhaps even more due to the constant contact with the perished refugees and their extreme fatigue. So they are working constantly, they are constantly in contact with the refugees, and the epidemics are prevailing. So we know that according to records, at least 15 volunteers caught typhoid, and Mr. Robert P. Master lost his life because of it. So this is Turkish Compassion Fund was the main organism, main institution to organize the British relief for the Ottoman war refugees. However, there is a subcommittee, that is the Ladies Committee. Okay, there is a mistake. There is supposed to be a picture. This is where the source comes from. Sorry about it. So, Ladies Committee was established by the wife of the ambassador, Henry Layard, Enid Layard. Lady Layard decided to establish a society for the relief of the Turkish sick and wounded with other ladies, wives of the prominent European gentlemen resided in the Ottoman capital, and also the wives of the several Ottomans of the rank. These are the members of the committee. Okay, so that is this list comes from the report book of the Turkish Compassionate Fund. I regard this ladies committee and some other committees as a part of the unplanned assistance to the refugees, but because at the beginning, at the beginning of their establishment, they didn't aim to help the refugees. They were established to help the combatants. However, throughout the time, as the refugees rose in number, they became the priority. So they changed their, let's say, their work. So this is a part of the unplanned assistance. So the main historical source this period, alongside with the other sources that I've told you about, was Lady Layard's diaries. Lady Layard took daily notes. Most of them are very personal, but some works very well to understand the content of the relief work, especially in the embassy, in their residence. The ladies committee, so these women came together and formed the ladies committee in Constantinople, in Istanbul, and they started working. The main workplace was the British embassy in Tarabya. That is the residence. It doesn't survive today, not anymore. This is the British embassy in Tarabya, so the main workplace of the ladies committee. And they, in the records, if we see them, even the visitors, because they received a lot of visitors, guests, even the guests found themselves helping with the ladies committee's work. The ladies met once a week and continued sewing for the rest of the week on their own. Okay, so basically they prepared supplies for already existing committees like Stafford House Committee and British Red Cross and Red Crescent. They started sewing. They sewed sheets and pillows. They prepared bandages. They prepared beddings. Their supplies spread all around from east to western theaters of the war. So that was the beginning of their work. But eventually, their work changed shape. How so? Because clothing of the refugees turned out to be a great obstacle for the Turkish Compassionate Fund. The ladies committee.
You've got 5 minutes left for your presentation.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
So the ladies committee eventually diverted their work to relief of the refugees. The agents of the Turkish Compassion Fund could no longer find necessary garments in the local bazaars. This is how the ladies, mainly the English ladies in Istanbul, they started sewing clothes, garments for the refugees in Istanbul, and they were also spread all around. It's interesting that even under this extreme circumstance, they were in destitute conditions, but ladies committee were receiving detailed instructions regarding the outlook of the garments, because they are coming from different backgrounds, different groups of identities, of course. So they had different preferences, and they didn't want to look. They didn't want their clothes to show that it's a part of the relief. It's a charity. So basically, they were trying to be as careful as possible, trying to prepare clothes for the refugee, especially refugee ladies. Eventually, ladies committee started to employ refugee women. These women were staying in Beylerbeyi Palace and Hasköy in Istanbul. They hired their work, and this became a self-sufficient system. We know that there was a sensitivity regarding the funds, because the Turkish Compassion Fund was the donators of the Turkish Compassion Fund, they were very determined that their money would go to non-combatants only. So when the money goes to ladies committee, they were worried that the money was being used for the soldiers. So there was a clear distinction made between the two funds. It's interesting with the ladies committee. I know I have very little time left, but basically Lady Layard's work was recognized by Sultan Abdülhamit II, and he initiated an order, the Order of Mercy, to honor her. So it is for the first time this imperial order was actually issued by the Ottoman authorities, by a sultan. It is called Şefkat Nişanı, the Order of Mercy, and Lady Layard turned out to be the first woman to receive this honor, this order. It is quite interesting because she is the first one, but later on the Order of Mercy became the order that is given to ladies by the sultans in the later period of the empire as well. And this in fact became a very significant detail, because Lady Layard alongside Henry Layard, they were invited to palace. They had dinner with the Sultan, and Sultan personally tied the order around the neck of Lady Layard. So in this picture over here, we can actually see her wearing the Order of Mercy. And I believe that it's no coincidence that the name of the Nişan in Ottoman is Şefkat Nişanı, because the committee is also the Turkish Compassion Fund, is translated as Sermaye-i Şefkati Osmaniye. So I believe the word was borrowed by the Sultan, or I mean, he obviously liked the word that was picked for the committee. All right, so basically these are the two main committees for the relief of the refugees. The Turkish Compassion Fund was the main institution, and Ladies Committee eventually became a subcommittee of the committee. But there were two other relief committees. I won't go into details. The Stafford House Committee and the British Red Cross. It's also known as the National Society for the Aid to Sick and Wounded in War. These are two committees. Also, they were on duty in the Ottoman lands, but they were working for the combatant, for the soldiers. So their fundings were very distinct as well. They did not want to spend their money on the civilians. But these extreme conditions made them encounter with the refugees, and when we go through their records, we come to realize that they couldn't help it, but they secured the refugees as well. These are my last sentences. The most significant, drastic, let's say, incident that took place regarding the Stafford House Committee, as I told you, that was also designed to help the soldiers, was their undertaking in St. Sophia, because obviously the conditions they were suffering, the refugees were suffering in masses, and the officials of the Stafford House Committee they took the risk, and they sent 4 doctors to St. Sofia to check the refugees, to separate the sick from the healthy, and they had vaccinated children. They gave some kind of an order within these massive structures. So basically, St. Sophia and Blue Mosque, especially St. Sophia, they were the most symbolic, iconic buildings, structures of the time for the 93 refugees. And Stafford House Committee doctors could not help but took a part in relieving the refugees there as well. So British Red Cross also partially relieved the refugees, but overall they played a small part in the general picture. When we look at the end of the operations, of course, there are a lot, but basically it turns out to be a compassionate episode in Anglo-Ottoman relations, because it started as, we know from Layard's records, he aimed to sort of give a positive image to Turkish public. But in the end, I read a lot of documents, all these records, all of these letters. It wasn't really a pure diplomacy. Humanitarian part of it played, let's say, it became more and more prominent throughout the time, I can say it. And in the end, they kept recording these prayers received from the refugees, especially refugee women. They kept saying that, as you have done to us, so may God do to you and your houses forever. So they were basically blessing them and thanking them for their help. Okay, I know I'm a bit out of time. Thank you very much for listening.
Not at all. That was absolutely fascinating. So thank you very much, and many congratulations on a beautiful piece of work, equally beautifully explained. I think that the structure and the organization of these AIDS efforts is terribly important for us to understand, as indeed is the wider political context. Now I can see already there is a question in the chat, so let's go to it straight away. So Nesrin would say, what happens to TCF?
This is Turkish Compassion Fund.
It must be. Do you want to ask your question live? Just unmute yourself if you would.
Hi.
Go
yes,
ahead,
that was my question. I wonder first of all, let me thank you. That was fascinating, an amazing presentation. And it shows how similar situations we are at the moment. Then it was war. Today there are wars. Also, we are trying to help for earthquake victims. And I found it really interesting. And I wonder what happened to this TCF.
Yes. Well, basically, all of this, not only Turkish Compassionate Fund, but other organizations, they gradually ended their operations here in Turkey. But with Turkish Compassionate Fund, we come across with an interesting story, because they had this very strong relation with the Ladies Committee. And Ladies Committee, basically, with the refugees, with this immediate work, they concluded it by the end of 1878. So it took, the active part of it took about a year. But later on, since they strongly connected to Ladies Committee, and Ladies Committee started employing refugee women. And after a certain point, they realized that these refugee women were very talented with the embroidery. This is like the laces, like nakış and all that. All right. So basically, is that these women could actually copy the motifs they had in hand, and they started employing following this view for embroideries, and they started selling these pieces of art, let's say, in London. So we make a further research regarding the future of Turkish Compassionate Fund. We come across with a very weak connection with the later works of this woman, Working Women Committee, I believe the name was. And it's also known as the Turkish Compassionate Fund in some sources, until 1888. So basically, for the following decade, some of the works of this refugee woman that were sold in London or in Paris as well, they were regarded as a part of the Turkish Compassionate Fund's work. However, we know in reality, with the refugees, they concluded their work by the end of 1878 due to a number of reasons, because they said that it's not safe anymore because of the epidemics, and the war is over now. So they are trying, the settlement was the next phase. So they were sort of pulling their forces back.
Thank
Does
you.
that answer your question?
Thank you. Yes, it does.
Good.
But I think with other charities I'm involved, especially with FIVL, I think this lady should be congratulated and should be remembered every now and then. We should celebrate her life and what she has done to people.
Are you referring to Baroness Burdett Coutts?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, she's extraordinary. Yes.
Yes, very inspirational. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Well, please, and it's very nice that you could be with us, and Anthony Wynne, that is. Please do go ahead and ask your question. You'll need to unmute yourself only.
Yes, hello. I was absolutely riveted by that. Thank you very much. But I'm just slightly worried by the idea that perhaps the British had done relief work on their own. And I wondered if you could tell us something about how the Ottomans themselves organized their own effort. And you said that the refugees were, when they arrived, they were put in the big mosques, which makes sense because they had lots of space. But what was the contribution of the ulema and the merchants and the craftsmen's guilds, I think they call it the ISNAF?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, at the beginning of my research, of course, I began with with understand, what were the relief committees in general? What was existing already before the British arrived? So basically, the Commission for Immigrants, Muhacirin Komisyonu, that is the official institution established in 1860s with the first influx of refugees coming from the Russian territories. So they were trying to cope with the first influx after the Crimean War. So this is the official institution. So also we know that it is a part of the culture, and especially the Islamic culture, to sort of help out the muhajirin. So this is like a religious religious responsibility for the civilians as well. So we know that people organized a lot. They formed small committees in the neighborhoods, centered on their local mosques, local masjids. We know that people actually personally housed incoming refugees. And there are some criticism regarding some people, in fact, did not want to take anyone to their houses, but we know that most of them did. So there were some civilian initiatives, and when we talk about I believe that's why you are asking about the religious class, the ulema. I'm not really aware of a direct connection, but they must be a part of all kind of activities, relief efforts, because as I told you, relieving, like assisting the refugees is still regarded as a religious obligation. Okay, so I'm sure they played an important role, but I don't really know what kind of an institution they, if they had any. I don't really know what kind of a commission they had.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to make sure that you hadn't forgotten the local contribution.
Of course not. I mean, this is a huge topic,
Yes.
and so I couldn't. It's like timing is always a bit of a problem for me. But I'm at the beginning of my research. I started with sort of underlining all the existing relief committees. Then I jumped to the British side of it.
Good. All right. Well, that's wonderful. That's absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any more questions from people who would like to question? Go ahead, Peter, please. Oh, and Peter had his hand up just first. Sorry, Ayşegül. So it's Peter first, then Ayşegül. Go ahead, Peter. You'll need to unmute yourself, so don't forget. That's it. Go ahead.
Yes, I can offer one small indication of what you were just talking about. I happen to have a catalogue which was printed in Istanbul, in Ottoman, of course, for a sale to raise money for the Dinçyürek refugees. And it's small, I suppose probably 20 pages. I haven't looked at it for decades, but it's very well produced. It's in colour and shows the objects which were on sale. And the reason I have it was that I'd given my wife as a wedding present a Bosnian kaftan, a jubbe. And there was an illustration of this, a similar jubbe in this catalogue as one of the objects sale.
It is the first time I hear such a thing. This is quite interesting. So they actually had a catalog of the stuff they were selling.
Yes.
To help. Well, this is quite. I haven't come across such a thing. Thank you very much for the contribution. I will look it up if I can find it.
The illustrations are in colour, and you know, I remember it without having looked at it recently as being very well produced.
Oh, this is quite interesting. I wish I could see it.
Do you remember the title, Peter? Can we give another title? How can we give a bit more concrete information?
With I can look for it. It's locked up in a tin box.
What period is it from? What year,
it is 1877 to 8. Right, of course, it's in Ottoman, so it's Doc Sandwich.
Yeah, I haven't come across with a catalog, but I know that they were selling, as I told you, this handwork, this beautiful handwork by women. But I remember coming across with an album in the archives that was in fact prepared specially by the, I mean, it was the order of Abdülhamit II. It's a compilation of photographs of the refugees, especially sick and wounded refugees. I believe it was prepared to give a very direct message to the other governments, because copies of this album was sent to England as well as, if I'm not mistaken. And I know I came across with Layard's notes regarding this album, saying that basically the Sultan is disappointed with our stance, and they feel that they are left alone. And this is like the Sultan is trying to convince the European public opinion these sufferings are real by sending them the photographs zombed and seek refugees. And I was very lucky, because it was just pure luck in the archives, that I came across with one of these albums, and which was also a very strong tool of, let's say, public diplomacy in a way.
Well, thank you very much. And now, I think it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Sena. You mentioned the individual letters written by the people who received the relief, and you also mentioned this nishan given by the administration. So we can say that the Ottoman Empire felt both publicly and administratively like kind of indebted, maybe, towards the British relief. So did it affect the Ottoman-British relations maybe during or immediately after the war? Do you know anything about that?
Well, I have this tendency to believe that it had a positive contribution. I mean, because I've come across with a lot of representation of gratitude, not only by the Sultan, but also, for example, Ahmet Vefik Pasha was a prominent figure at the time. He was serving as the Speaker of the Parliament, and later he became the not Grand Vizier, but he was called Prime Minister probably. For a brief period of time they were called Prime Ministers, and he was the Prime Minister, so he was the Grand Vizier, obviously. And even he had very strong connection with the British circles, with Layard, and even he personally approached Layard for a portion of funding to be used for the refugees. So he is sort of like representing the top of the Ottoman administration, and he is also approaching the British funds. So I believe that this relief effort and the numbers, okay, I mean, it's not really easy to compare this, like what they meant at the time, but we understand that it was not little. So it made a difference. This relief effort made a difference and saved a lot of people. So this is basically, I mean, they recognize that. So they officially recognize it, and the like ordinary subjects recognize that as well. So and also, I mean, I kept repeat, Britain kept its neutrality, but we know that they were, of course, involved somehow because the British Armada anchored in Gallipoli at the time, so they were very close to Istanbul. In the case of Russian armies entering the capital, they were not going to stop. So they were neutral, but they were not that neutral. So the relations in the end, I mean, it cannot be said that they're not on a very bad page, but very soon afterwards, there is going to be the Cyprus Convention. And I mean, I'm sort of very nervous to talk about it in the presence of Gül Hoca, Gül Tokay, but with the Berlin Treaty and all that, the Ottomans are going to be, they will feel even more lonely. I mean, with the Berlin Treaty and Convention, because the Layard makes this great diplomatic maneuver and takes Cyprus from the Ottomans. So things are going to get spicier, and this is sort of opening the route towards the unfortunate First World War. But in the humanitarian side of it, things look pretty, let's say, pink.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that does bring us on to this fantastically important question of how things went from being close allies in the 19th century with all sorts of complicated links socially and otherwise into this catastrophe of the Germans, as it were, whisking the Ottomans from us under our noses. which is the way I like to think about it. I mean, it really was a dreadful situation. I remember in the 1980s, the newspaper headlines were, I'm talking about Turkey now, were full of new archival research shows that Enver Pasha was bought with a sack of gold. I remember, and I don't know whether it was as simple as that. I rather doubt it. I would be interested to hear your understanding of the slow disintegration of these organic links between the Ottoman Empire and Britain. But just before that, I want to thank you for featuring Layard, because I think Layard was one of the most brilliant men that Britain has ever produced. A quite remarkable writer, and a man of profound understanding of social life as well. His books and his descriptions of social life are really first class, simply as documents about the way that the different societies he wrote about lived their lives. So I think that looking at the way his career, as it were, ended up not being quite as successful as he thought it would be is also a very interesting question. But anyway, how do you understand the breakdown of relations between the two empires?
Well, first of all, I should underline something with the Layards and with their memoirs. We are so thankful to Gül Hoca once again, because she was in fact among the team, right? If I'm mistaken, please correct me, Hocam. But you were among the team that sort of worked on the memoirs at the beginning of 2003, right? Or I don't know, 2006, 2007, perhaps, right? If I'm not mistaken. So this was a great contribution. I am thankful to you every day. So not only with the memoirs, of course, but with the other documents too. So I mean, this is a huge question. I think it's very hard to understand, and yeah, I mean, it's not. I don't think there was a it didn't really change from one day to another. There was not a click, like sort of a button changed the relations between the Ottomans and the British. But I mean, with the change of the government at the beginning of the next century, all the developments and the changing of balance of power. We know that at the beginning of the First World War, in fact, the prominent members of the government, of the Unionist government, they tried to form some kind of an alliance with Britain as well, but they could not. So they were not certain being an ally to the Germans anyway, so they sort of found themselves in this position. So I don't really know how to answer. It's a long process, about 25 years. A lot has changed, and obviously, I mean, the classical explanation is like the Ottoman lands lost their importance, and it was like inevitable. The disintegration of the empire was inevitable. It was, and so now they could not, let's say, work on keeping a large empire anymore, but like a smaller Turkey. So there are like all these class explanations, but I don't really know if there is a certain formula, a certain development that actually unlocked this door for the First World War conditions, to be honest.
But it's possible that the British, as you say, thought that it was better to let the whole thing go. And then they could increase their influence by taking over the territories, which is in effect what Lloyd George was trying to implement after the war. That's one way of looking at it. But nevertheless, I think it would be very, very interesting to compare the German with the British policies and the different ways that they outlined them. I can see you're nodding your head, Gül. I don't know whether you'd like to make any comment about that. Yes, you'll need to unmute yourself, of course. Sorry about that. Everything is automatically muted. There we are. Now
story, but I think maybe just very briefly, the shift in the British politics with Gladstone, it emerged, you see. So because Gladstone was against the Ponianism and then the Disraelis and everything, and the Layard was a conservative and they didn't get along together, you see. So the shift immediately emerged when Disraeli lost the elections in 1880, no? And then with the Salisbury and the Gladstone, another era started in British politics. That's the domestic reasons, other than the international ones, you see. This is, and then that shift started and continued till the Great War.
Yeah.
But one day, and we talk about that days for an excellent lecture by Sena. Yes. So we just enjoyed that one. But as you mentioned my name, I have a very brief question, Sena, if I can, just to finish it up. So when all these 8 efforts were taking place, what were the liberals' reaction in the UK, in Britain, for example? You know, like the Gladstonians, and they were so much against the layout, you know, against the conservatives. So it was a different ball game, you know, and that was the public opinion, you know, in the newspapers like Guardian and so on, you know, there was so much against the war and what was happening. So have you come across to any information about the reaction against all this compassionate funds and everything by the liberals in England?
Yeah. Yes, Hocam, basically, I mean, when they pulled the, let's say, the debate to the humanitarian level, and when they limit their relief to the civilians only, there is not much room left for them to oppose. So that's why they were very careful. I mean, because I went through newspapers trying to understand the reaction, and with the Russian atrocities being heard in London, I understand that their voice was a bit diminished, so they didn't really speak up that well, and this became a humanitarian issue. And because the British public was not actually helping the Ottoman army, they did not openly oppose. But perhaps if we go to the I didn't really go into the details of the list of the contributors, because there are huge lists. Perhaps if we work on them, we will come to understand that most of the contributors were conservatives anyway. So yes, so we don't really know what's happening in reality. This is a different level of research, but perhaps they were just keeping silence, but they were not contributing. So but as I told you, so they sort of pulled the debate to the level of humanitarian help. So they sort of stopped them from happening. And perhaps, at the beginning of when they established the Turkish Compassionate Fund, they had the recognition and approval as well. So this is sort of an upper level as well. Yeah, there is support of the Queen too. So perhaps this makes a difference too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Well, if there are no more questions, I think it just remains to thank our speaker for an absolutely fascinating evening, and of course to wish you all good fortune with your future researches.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And we shall say good night now. So good night.
Thank you very much for your patience. Bye.
Good night.
Thank you.